What if the most advanced winter survival system ever built didn't rely on thick walls or sealed doors or any of the things we now believe keep the cold out? We've been taught to picture winter on the Great Plains as a war, a land of endless wind, endless snow, endless suffering, where the cold is an enemy to be shut out, walled off, and defeated. But what if that idea is not just incomplete, but backwards? Because the people who truly mastered these winters understood something we've almost entirely forgotten. The most dangerous threat inside a winter shelter was never the storm outside, it was you. Think about it for a moment. Everything keeping you alive in that small, dark space is also quietly working against you. Your own breath, warm and damp, rising into the cold air, the heat of your body, the fire at the center, giving off warmth and moisture with every flame. Each one is essential, and each one releases water into the air, water that wants to become the very frost and ice that can kill you before morning. So here is the impossible problem these families faced every single night. How do you trap enough heat to survive, while somehow letting the deadly moisture escape? Seal the shelter too tightly, and you drown it in your own breath. Open it too much, and the cold pours in and takes everything. The answer they discovered was not a stronger wall or a bigger fire. It was something far more intelligent, a kind of knowledge that treated a simple tent as a living, breathing system. But to understand how they solved it, we first have to understand what moisture truly does inside a sealed and silent space. To understand that danger, picture the storm these people feared most. Not the roaring blizzard we imagine, but something quieter and far more deceptive, the ice storm. It begins as ordinary rain, falling soft and steady, until it touches ground already frozen below zero, and in an instant water turns to ice. Without warning, without mercy, branches shatter under invisible weight. The open grassland hardens into a sheet of glass, trails disappear, water sources vanish beneath a lid of ice, and the whole land seems to seal itself shut. And here is the truth these families understood in their bones. Cold, on its own, rarely kills. Moisture does. A dry body can endure astonishing cold, but the moment water enters the equation, heat drains away and death arrives in hours. Now here is where the story turns, because this same law exposed a deadly flaw in the shelters the settlers trusted most. When newcomers arrived on the plains, they built what their world called safety. Sod houses cut from the earth, log cabins chinked tight against the wind, solid, heavy, immovable. And on the coldest nights, those very walls betrayed them. Sealed shut with no way to breathe, they trapped everything the people inside gave off. Every warm breath, every bit of body heat, every wisp of steam from the fire, all of it rose, met the frozen walls, and turned to frost on the inside. Moisture soaked into the timber and the earth. It froze, it thawed, it froze again, rotting the wood and chilling the very rooms meant to protect them. The strongest houses became the wettest, and the wettest became the deadliest, quietly turning into sealed boxes of cold, damp air. This was the discovery that changed everything. The problem was never that a shelter wasn't solid enough, or thick enough, or sealed tightly enough. The problem was the ceiling itself. Survival did not belong to the house that stood the firmest against winter. It belonged to the one that knew how to breathe. But a shelter that breathes is only half the answer, because the greatest defense against a storm was never surviving it. It was knowing it was coming. Long before there were instruments to measure pressure or charts to track the weather, the people of the plains had learned to read the sky itself. They felt the small shifts in the air, the way the humidity changed its very texture. They watched the wind turn in a direction that carried a warning. They knew the shape of the clouds that gathered before ice, and they trusted the animals, who grew restless and sought shelter long before any human sense could feel what was coming. To them the land was never silent. It was speaking constantly, and they had learned to listen. So, when the signs aligned, the whole camp moved, not in panic, but in calm, practiced readiness, because they lived by a truth we've nearly lost. Survival does not respond to urgency, it responds to preparation. And now consider what that preparation actually made possible, because here the story overturns everything the modern world believes about a home. We're taught that strength means permanence, that the safest house is the one planted deepest, built heaviest, fixed most firmly to the ground, but on the plains the opposite was true. Their home could rise in about an hour and come down in minutes, folding into something light enough to carry. And that was not a weakness. It was the whole secret. A house that cannot move must face every storm head-on and endure whatever comes, but a house that can move can step aside. It can follow the herds, chase the good weather, and slip away from the worst of a storm before it ever arrives. Mobility itself was the technology, and this is exactly where the settlers were trapped. They had bound themselves to a single fixed point, one spot of earth they could never leave, forced to stand and take whatever the sky delivered. The people of the plains simply carried their entire world with them, moving with the seasons instead of bracing against them. So how do you build a home that can breathe? The answer took physical form in something that looks almost too simple to matter: a ring of poles rising into a cone, hides stretched across the frame, and a small opening at the very top. It appears to be nothing more than a tent, but hidden inside that shape is one of the most overlooked feats of engineering in North American history. Start with the cone itself. When wind strikes a flat wall, pressure builds unevenly until something gives way. But the curved surface of the tipi does something different. It doesn't fight the wind, it guides it, letting the force slide smoothly around and over the structure. These people had discovered that shape can give you more strength than thickness ever could. Yet the true genius lay in a single rule that governed everything. Control the moisture first, then control the heat. And this is where the shelter came alive, because a tipi does not simply stand in the wind, it breathes. At the top, two flaps framed the smoke hole like a pair of lungs, or a pair of great ears turned to the sky. With long outer poles, a family could swing those flaps to match the wind at any moment, opening them to draw warm, damp air and smoke up and out, narrowing them to hold heat when the cold bit hardest. Breathe in, breathe out, adjusted by hand through the night. And down below an inner wall, a liner, sometimes called a dew cloth, hung around the poles. As warm air rose and met the cold outer skin, the moisture gathered on that liner and ran harmlessly to the ground, while the living space stayed dry and warm, sealed in a second, gentler layer of insulation. The fire at the centre was never just a fire, it was the engine driving this whole cycle of breath, tended for steady, balanced heat. And beneath everyone lay grass, woven mats, and thick hides, trapping pockets of air so heat could not escape into the frozen earth, which is why the warmest place inside was often not beside the fire at all. This was the answer to the impossible problem from the very beginning. The shelter itself did the breathing, so the people inside could simply live. But even a breathing shelter could not save a person standing alone, and here our last assumption falls apart. We love the story of the lone survivor, the single figure conquering the wilderness through sheer will. The truth on the plains was almost the opposite. No one survived winter by themselves. The community survived, and it survived by working as a single, living body. Fuel was gathered and shared, water was kept from freezing, food was rationed, repairs were made before they were ever needed, and the young, the old, and the sick were placed where the warmth gathered most. Just as the tipi breathed to stay alive, the community moved as one to keep everyone within it breathing too. This may be the most overlooked survival technology of all. Not the fire, not the hides, not even the tipi. Cooperation. And so we return to the impossible problem we began with. How do you trap the heat that keeps you alive while releasing the moisture that would kill you. Now the answer is clear, and it reaches far beyond a single night in the cold. These people did not defeat the moisture by sealing it out. They survived by letting it move. A shelter that breathed instead of suffocating. A home that traveled instead of standing trapped. A community that shared instead of hoarding. Everything flowed. Meanwhile, the settlers, with all their heavy walls and fixed foundations, kept trying to seal the world shut, and the world kept turning against them. Perhaps that is the lesson still waiting for us, as we close ourselves inside sealed rooms and airtight homes, and slowly forget how to feel a change in the wind. Survival was never about shutting the world out. It was about letting life flow through. Here at Dark Origins, we search for the forgotten wisdom that kept our ancestors alive long before the modern world began. If this journey moved you, stay with us, and keep listening, because the past still has so much left to teach us.